More and more adults, especially women, are starting to ask themselves questions they might not have had courage to before. Do I have ADHD? For many, the answer doesn't show up in chaos or hyperactivity. It's showing up in burnout, brain fog, time blindness, exhaustion, and feeling like you're constantly working twice as hard just to keep up. So today's conversation, we're going to talk about what ADHD looks like in adulthood, why so many people are diagnosed later in life, and how understanding your brain can actually turn what feels like a struggle into a superpower. And with me today is a good friend of mine and fellow coach who actually specializes in this field. Elle O'Flaherty is formerly an attorney, and she is now putting her sights in making the most impact for senior executives who are now transitioning into creating ADHD superpowers. Hey, Elle, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here.
What I loved about coaching with you and your specialty is you know who you are. You were an attorney, and then you recognized that this was a diagnosis that maybe you needed, or how did that start for you?
Yeah. Well, I always tell people that I was born and grew up in the 80s in Virginia when women couldn't catch ADHD. So I was immune until later in life, like so many of us. About 70 to 80% of people with ADHD are undiagnosed. And so it's really, really common for people to either be diagnosed in adulthood or not at all. It was pretty clear to me I had all the classic symptoms. I just wanted to work with my brain instead of against it. As you mentioned, I had a nearly 20-year legal career, a lot of which I spent, frankly, white knuckling my way through it. And making a big pivot to make my life work with my brain has made just a huge difference.
I think I love and I learned so much from you in this is that you didn't work against yourself. You knew that your brain had all these really special, unique qualities. And instead of being judgmental, you're like, well, this is how I'm most productive in this way. And this is how I use my superpowers to my advantage. I'm so impressed that you decided to pivot and make this part of your career and actually take this on. What's sort of a demographic that you're seeing very readily coming to the realization that ADHD is part of their story?
Well, a lot of parents, and specifically women, because their kids will get diagnosed. And as their psychiatrist or whomever is walking through the symptoms inventory, they'll be like, that sounds very familiar.
Yes.
It is a little bit of a hard thing, I think, sometimes to come to terms with in two ways. One is sometimes people are resistant because there is a huge stigma around ADHD. One survey showed that more than 90% of neurotypical folks have a negative or strongly negative association with ADHD. One survey of college professors found that without any information about the student, 60% of professors wouldn't want any ADHD people in their class. So the stigma is unfortunately still very, very real. The other thing is, and I see this all the time with my newly diagnosed clients, that people go through a grieving process. I did too, of what may have been, like if I had known this in school or if I had made different choices. And that's something that most people don't talk about. And it really can affect people.
It is such a realization when you realize all along that there was nothing wrong with you, right? It just functions differently. And you very interestingly pointed out when we were speaking earlier that perimenopause is actually one of those chapters where we start to notice more. Can you speak on that?
Yeah. Well, any major life event can really bring out some ADHD characteristics, but perimenopause is a huge one. And part of that is because the fluctuation in hormones in our brain, it can affect the same areas that are impacted by ADHD. We have differences in our serotonin and dopamine, which is also, that is sort of helped along by estrogen. So when that naturally starts tapering off, we see really big impacts. And I have clients all the time who come in and they're saying, I could handle my ADHD my whole life. And all of a sudden it's like I'm losing my mind.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and I say, I mean, you're going through reverse puberty, right? It's a huge, huge change. And so I think that's something we need to acknowledge and understand. And not many people hear that from their primary care physicians or whomever they're talking about their menopause with. but it is really key to understand it.
I mean, that's amazing. And I think it's also when we talk about this, some of us have internet ADHD, as I like to call it, where we see trendy memes or stories and we don't actually go to get the diagnosis or to talk to a professional. We just sort of self identify, or maybe the symptoms get too broad and we start thinking, oh, I misplaced my keys. I must have ADHD. And I'm sure you hear and see that enough. What's an element that really supports and helps people connect with that actual condition as opposed to the internet version?
Great question. Yeah. My least favorite thing is when people say, well, we're all a little ADHD.
You get it.
I'm like,
Yep.
there are four major brain structures in my brain that are different that you can see. So, well, one of the really interesting things, and this is the primary way that people get diagnosed in the United States with ADHD, is Harvard University's med school and the WHO work together on a symptoms inventory. And it's available on the internet. Anyone can see it. You can walk yourself through that and look at it. However, I will say that it is, in my opinion, very biased towards how ADHD shows up in folks who are hyperactive type and also how boys and men experience ADHD. And so I think it is really sorely needing an update, frankly. But it can start giving you a good idea. And some of the hallmarks of ADHD that neurotypical people tend not to experience are things like time blindness, where we won't notice time passing. And it's hard for us to really understand time in the same way that neurotypical people do. Another one is that we go into hyperfocus. And when I say hyperfocus, I know that neurotypical people talk about a flow state, but I mean like you won't notice you need to go to the bathroom, which is a big one for us. You won't notice
Or,
that you're
or
thirsty
eat.
or hungry.
Yes. Yep.
And that tends not to happen to neurotypical people.
That's really good. I mean, those are really good things. Now, I in my wellness practice, a lot of times see people who give these symptoms on, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm always excited to talk to you and to other specialists about this. But I think we also don't talk about how this affects us socially, just not at work. So can you tell me what it would be like or what my experience would be like outside of the office? Because some of us can mask really well at the office, as you know, because we're hyper focused and that sort of thing. What does ADHD feel like in a social setting?
It's a huge impact, frankly. It starts from when we're very young. When I ask ADHD adults the word that was most commonly said about them or to them by their peers when they were kids, the word is weird. And it's really weaponized. Other kids think that we're weird, and we tend to not, we tend to have more social isolation, which then causes less of an ability to practice our social skills, and it's a vicious cycle. And so we also tend to have trouble keeping friends. We'll often have new sets of friends because we lack object permanence. It's kind of like when you go to work and your dog sort of forgets that you exist.
Yep.
It's very similar. We
Yes.
can be close with someone, but we don't really recognize or like sort of connect the dots that they still exist when they're outside of our immediate
Yep.
focus. So that can be challenging, as well as the way that we speak and process thoughts. We don't just see the tree or the forest, but we see the tree, the forest, the field behind it, the ocean, the whales in the ocean. Our brains filter out less information, which
Wow.
is great because it means that we can make connections and come up with innovative ideas that neurotypical people might not be able to. But it also means that our way of speaking is often nonlinear. And we also tend to have ideas that neurotypical people have trouble understanding or latching onto because they can't see all that information.
Yeah. I
So
can see
sometimes,
myself stories too. Yes. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
So sometimes that can be a real challenge.
I think that's really interesting. And it is, and sometimes it's actually that some ADHD folks actually find each other and find this like camaraderie in friendship. I've also seen that quite a bit. Now, you said something really cool, and I'm glad you said it that way. The ADHD brain looks differently and actually functions differently. Can you speak a little bit to the specifics of what that is or what hormones are coming in or being missed in that regards?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as we noted, I am a doctor by training. I am not by any means a medical professional. But sort of in layman's terms, we have, as I said, four different structures in our brain that are physically different. And then we also have a different uptake of serotonin and dopamine. And so we become dopamine seeking missiles, is what I call us. because we lack the same ability to take up dopamine and to sort of process it, that we are always looking for a little hit of dopamine and way more than neurotypical people. So that's why we get really excited about little things. Like if you want someone to get excited for you and be your cheerleader, find a group of ADHD people. We're always sort of like looking at things and noticing things and it's just a really different way of experiencing the world. But it also means that in low dopamine situations, like a 2-hour meeting, boredom to us can manifest as physical pain
Oh,
on sort
yep.
of, and
Yep.
so it's very, very challenging for us when we're bored. No one likes to be bored, but for us, it's a much more extreme experience than what neurotypical people are talking about.
And it also shows what you're drawn to as a result. So that's interesting. And the other thing you said that I love so much is that how this shows up male and female in that same regard. So not just the brain, but the physical, right? Hormones, those sort of things. What do we see different in our adult years?
We used to have ADD and ADHD, and ADD no longer exists as a term. So now ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, is an umbrella term that
Mm.
actually has three distinct subtypes. And so the first one is inattentive. These are kind of your daydreamers who are sort of looking out the window. They might not hear you when you're talking to them, lose their keys, that sort of a thing. The second type is hyperactive impulsive type. And that's what most people think of. It's a 7-year-old boy bouncing off the walls.
Mm-hmm.
But 60% of us, and hey, that's me, are combined type where we have traits from both. More girls than boys are inattentive type generally, and more women than men are inattentive type. As we get older, though, more sort of overall ADHD adults become more either combined or inattentive type.
Nice.
Um, so it
Yeah.
can change your classification, but unfortunately, and this is where I'm going to climb up on my soapbox, so please forgive me, but I speak
Get
I
up there.
speak to a lot of at a lot of conferences for therapists and counselors and doctors. And from them, I've learned that the average medical professional or mental health professional receives a total of 15 to 20 minutes of training on ADHD.
Oof. Okay.
And
Yeah.
in the last 10 years, we've had a renaissance in our understanding of ADHD. So, anyone who has not received training since then or hasn't received more training since school, they tend not to even know about the different subtypes and
Yes.
how differently ADHD can show up. And so, I think that's really, really problematic, especially for those of us who are socialized to experience and mask ADHD differently, which is usually women, girls, and people of color.
I'm glad you said that. There is a huge distinction because in the case of young women growing up, we are conditioned to show up a certain way
Yeah.
where boys will be boys, right? Are often given a little more latitude to be physical, to be jumping off the walls. We contribute that to some sort of hormone difference between those two, but that's interesting because ADHD does show up different with young women, young men, and I think that was probably the hard thing early on when we knew very little as a childhood for us about
Mhm.
what that was. Unless a child was jumping off their desk, they didn't really get a diagnosis, right? Or they weren't given whatever medication they were offering at that point.
Yeah.
So that's really profound. Well, I was going to say it's 60% at a combination. What does that look like? If I'm day to day, what does a 60% or a combination for those folks look like?
It can look like us being a little restless, maybe fidgety when we're meant to sit still. So that's sort of the hyperactive, maybe impulsivity in things that we say, or sometimes purchasing is a big one for many of
Yeah.
us.
Okay.
Um, the inattentive can come in by looking like things like people could talk to you and you won't even hear them because you're sort of focused on what you're doing, procrastination, and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it can look super, super different, which is why when I'm talking about ADHD, I try to really emphasize that it's not monolithic. And just like our sort of sister neurodivergence, autism spectrum disorder, we can manifest really, really differently.
Yeah. And it almost feels like there's a little bit overlap if you watch the internet. And it's one of those things where sometimes it's really interesting to watch people do a comparison side by side. And I know that you speak to ADHD and autism is a another fun topic altogether, right? Because these are,
Mhm.
I'm telling you, neurodivergent brains are so interesting and so fun. I don't think they're a problem as much as we just haven't created a society where people can process differently, right? Our school systems, things like that.
Totally.
So, as adults, what kind of support are people usually coming to you for?
Well, you just made a really, really good point. In the United States, about 10% of adults have ADHD. And that's about the same percentage as people who are left handed, which I happen to be. And so I describe it to my clients like the whole world was built for right handed people because they're 90% of people. It's not a
Uh-huh.
good or a bad thing. It just means that it isn't built for us. But when we get the tool we need, and I often cite the left handed can opener, um, then suddenly things become so much easier. And I think it's the same with ADHD, right? There's nothing good or bad about what type of brain you have. It's just that the majority won. And so we need tools and systems in place that work for our brains because the way we're taught to do things, especially typical productivity advice, tends to be pretty terrible for ADHD people.
Yes, and we know this is the group that often could pull off a 3-day work week or maybe a 1-day work week as far as productivity goes.
Yep.
You and I had a great conversation before this about other symptoms that come and affect ADHD people differently. Their sleep and things like that.
Mhm.
Things that, if you know that you have a sleep concern or you have trouble sleeping, but you had an actual physical experience yourself recently with a vitamin D deficiency, that there seems to be a correlation for ADHD and the effects.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And most people don't understand how wide reaching ADHD is. As you said, many of us have sleep troubles. I call myself a professional insomniac for many years. Vitamin D is one of those things that is very impactful for everyone. And there's a huge number of people who have vitamin D deficiencies. I didn't realize that I was one of them. And there's an extremely simple blood test that any doctor can get for you that will quickly show you if you are. After studying this a bit more, I learned that vitamin D, it sounds like, oh, okay, a vitamin, it's some part of our body, but it's really closer to a hormone. And that's how we should think about it more. And that it impacts so many systems in your body, one of which being that it impacts serotonin and dopamine. And for a long time, we only thought vitamin D was made in your kidneys, but there's actually a little factory for it in your brain too because
Mm.
it's so important to your brain running well. Some studies have shown a big correlation. It's like I can't remember exactly, but it's 2.5 times more likely if kids are vitamin D deficient that they will also be diagnosed with ADHD.
Wow.
And so we don't know sort of correlation, causation, what's going on there, but I myself experienced this and I was so exhausted. One of the big signs of vitamin D deficiency is exhaustion. I mean, I was just dragging every day. And so when I found this out and I started taking supplements, which again, really easy fix, instantly, I mean, the next day I felt better. And when I forget to take them, it's like an immediate crash. So for me, it's been a huge, obvious impact on my quality of life. The other thing is, and I will proudly say I'm in my late 40s, perimenopausal women tend to have lower vitamin D. And
Mm.
perimenopause causes brain fog, so does vitamin D deficiency, and so can ADHD. So when you put all three of those together, it's a bad scene. So
Yes.
now I'm the biggest champion for like, have you had your vitamin D checked?
And this is what I mean. This is how we learn because, like we said, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, our limited experience or understanding and thinking about where we are today. So, vitamin D is a new study as well. If we look into the NIH story, studies and things like that, this is a new study. This is a new concept or new correlation. So, the more we have these conversations, the better we can support each other in that case. So again, we're not diagnosing, we're not saying, you have these and this must be it and you should go out and get this vitamin D, but it is like when you allow yourself to be curious and not judgmental, right? So sometimes we get really, especially in perimenopause, we get really judgmental about our faculties and our productivity and things like that, or holding on to some concept, but it's people like you, Elle. It's coaches like you that show up and offer this unique support in these cases where I have this diagnosis and here are the tools that I can offer you as a client or as a person that is struggling with this or struggling to learn the skills they need. So there's nothing wrong with you if you have ADHD. I want to really underline, emphasize, italicize this, that
Yep.
there is nothing wrong with your brain if you have ADHD, but you're left-handed, right? You need different skills. And the idea that you need to judge yourself based on being given a right-handed can opener is not
Oh,
fair,
yeah.
is not just, and honestly is the least productive thing you can do for your brain. So if you are curious about the possibility that this could be part of your neurodivergent, experience, where do people go? Like, what's a platform, what's a place people can go to start getting curious about this?
Well, of course, you can talk to your doctor or mental health care professional if you want to pursue a diagnosis. But a couple of really good places that you can get started are first, I love Attitude Magazine's online magazine. It's ADD Etude. They committed before we changed the name of things. But they have great resources for people individually, for parents of kids with ADHD. All of it's free and available, and it is great. And some of the luminaries in our field write amazing articles for that. I also, if you aren't someone who enjoys reading, because many of us, ADHD impacts how your eyes move when you're reading, I really recommend How to ADHD. It's a great, very easily digestible YouTube channel, and she is absolutely wonderful. Jessica McCabe, another person who's very famous in our community. And if you're looking for a book, if you want to read one or listen to one, ADHD 2.0 is excellent. And it presents it in a very neutral and positive way because, frankly, ADHD comes with huge, huge gifts. We are 300% more likely to be entrepreneurs. We are overrepresented in places like in emergency departments and hospitals, litigating attorneys, and startups because we have this really innovative thinking and we're great in emergencies.
It is funny how that works. Yeah. So I was like, if you have an emergency, I know who you should reach out to. But if you want to do something menial, like maybe just don't call me. Or if you have the So I love that you said that. Your superpower is right in front of you. And if you're curious and if you feel like this may be something you want to dig into, oh, thanks for giving us those resources. That's really huge. Elle is actually also a coach and she works with different organizations. Her company is called Interlace Solutions. Is that correct?
Yep.
And if you want to reach out and work with Elle or talk to Elle or get connected with some of the workshops that she's part of, we'll go ahead and put her information in the show notes as well. Thanks for joining us today, all of you. Thanks for being curious about your beautiful, wonderful, non-judgmental brain, because your superpower, your chance to level up, has everything to do with you being kind, curious, and a little adventurous. So even if you aren't ADHD yourself, share it with somebody who you know is, because they want to be part of that community too. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.